In the autumn of 1992, my first quarter at Meadville Lombard Theological School, a Unitarian Universalist seminary then affiliated with the University of Chicago, I ventured slightly off the usual path for incoming students and took a course offered by an extension faculty member, Carol Hopakowski, on environmental ethics. After drawing spiritual inspiration from hiking the Appalachian trails and transitioning toward a vegetarian diet, in part for environmental and human rights reasons, I was drawn into studying the philosophical underpinnings of the environmentalism movement. One of the texts that we read and discussed in class was Lynn White's great essay from 1966, entitled The Historical Roots of Our Ecologic Crisis. Lynn White was not a scientist. He was a historian of Europe, of the Middle Ages, and also had a degree from a seminary. His essay was seeking out the origin of an idea. Lynn White was trying to discern the mindset that had brought Western civilization to an ongoing environmental crisis. It was obvious then that the United States was experiencing an environmental crisis caused by human action. In 1892, the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia and in 1952, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland caught fire. Rivers do not catch fire normally. Other rivers would catch fire from pollution in the years that followed White's essay. By the 1960s, it was becoming obvious to most people that bodies of water do not usually catch fire and that humans were responsible for changing things. White's essay presented the idea that the roots of the environmental crisis were rooted in the Judeo-Christian scriptures. He made the point that the problem with the transition out of the Middle Ages to progressively modern eras was, he pointed out that problem, that there have been problems with this transition. Eventually, during the Enlightenment, Western civilization made a boundary between human beings and the natural world, and it became a firmer boundary than before. The heart of this distinction, White asserted, was found in the Jewish and Christian scriptures, especially in the book of Genesis, in the Bible. In Genesis, God says to Adam and Eve, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over it, the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." White believed that this passage gave humans the right to use the earth and all her life forms. It was intended by those words that humans would dominate the planet and use its resources. But remember, in those days, it was assumed that the resources of the planet were infinite. Even in places like ancient Israel and Asia and where people were, there was the assumption there was so much for people to encounter. How could this idea, though, become prevalent during the Enlightenment? After all, so many of the thinkers and scientists during that time were rationalists, theological rebels, or even atheists. The point that White was making was that the ideas the Enlightenment thinkers promoted, despite their theological rebelliousness, were grounded in theological beliefs in the distant past. Ideas can travel from their origins and still retain their original perspective. In other words, even though many of the Enlightenment thinkers rejected most of the theology of the Bible, they retained some of the foundational elements, especially as they related to dominion of the earth and her non-European peoples, who were often oppressed as lesser life forms during the colonizing era. Western thought, then and now, still holds that humans are more important than anything else. It seems self-evident to so many people in our society. It's certainly self-evident to the politicians who put human needs above the needs of this planet, as if they weren't connected. If any consideration is given to the destruction of the environment from our actions, that destruction is usually only considered in terms of the impact it has on human beings. We still rarely value the natural world as having the inherent right to exist. Our thought processes reveal the belief that other forms of life are inferior to ours. It is the same kind of ideology that fostered the subjugation of other human beings who were not of European ancestry. What might we do to counter our own devaluation of the natural world and encourage reverence for life? We need to begin with ourselves as a culture. I read an article online about different directions in environmental ethics. And I was trying to think about ways to frame this in terms of environmental ethics, and I still have that direction. But every environmental ethicist in the article seemed to be a white male academic who is building his environmental ethics based upon one philosophical branch that was founded by people just like himself. Surely they all had tenure and plenty of published papers and had led colloquialisms on act utilitarianism in contrast with role utilitarianism and consequentialism and all kinds of isms, all kinds of technologically impossible things for most ordinary people to grasp. These are men accustomed to dancing theoretically on the ceiling. One knew that they felt more comfortable thinking abstractly about issues than delving into practical solutions that might help our society coalesce around real behaviors to reduce the effects of our potential crisis. Without confidence in these philosophical abstractions, it seemed to me that more practical ethical paths would be more helpful. And so I went off the grid on that article. That article did not mention ethical movements that were not academic. And I found, though, that there were some that were academic, but also practical, and that weren't living in the realm of theory. One of those paths was ecofeminism. I have to admit I had not explored ecofeminism in the past because I thought it was not something that was available to men. I thought it was a women's movement exclusively. I was wrong in that assumption. Ecofeminism is a school of thought that examines the concept of gender to analyze the relationships between humans and the natural world. It also holds that empowering women to have choices and turn their own identity strengthens environmental protection. Bear with me, that must seem like a strange thing to consider. Empowering women strengthens environmental protection seems like an unusual conclusion. Yet I have also come to that point of view on my own before I read the article on ecofeminism. And there's a reason for it that's becoming more and more obvious to me, especially with what I'm going to share with you. There's probably no better example of this ecofeminist perspective than the People's Republic of China's one-child policy. In 1979, facing the risk of overpopulation, the Chinese government restricted couples to having only one child. The government did this by punishing those who had more than one child, often by truly horrible means that I don't want to go into this morning, and incentivizing one child by increased benefits to the couple who had only one child. This changed Chinese society. Women were still given the duty of child raising in the family, but they only had one child. That meant that the most intense responsibility that they had was the first 5 years. The child goes to school much of the day, and the mother has 7, 8 hours of free time. Thereafter, and then as school becomes more regular and the child grows further, the child may be coming home even later. Thereafter, women were able to pursue education, work, or careers. They were able to pursue a life that wasn't based solely on the home. The home was still important to them, but they could have a life that was not traditionally Chinese. The one-child policy was not a great thing in many ways. Girls were not valued in China as much as boys were, and there was a stream of girls who were adopted by people in other countries, so their parents could try again to have a boy. The result of this nowadays is there is a shortage of young women in China, contributing to a decline in population. There are just too many boys and not enough girls, men and women. Recognizing this result of the one-child policy and the potential it would have on central economic planning, the Chinese government reversed itself and is now encouraging families to have more children. That has not worked. 2 generations of women have grown up with the expectation that they would have 1, and in some locations, 2 children at most. Having fewer children and usually 2 incomes meant that families would have more income and that women would pursue their occupations, have a life outside of the traditional roles of wife and mother. Now Chinese women are not interested in returning to traditional roles, staying at home and having lots and lots of children. Most of them aren't. Some of them would like to do that, but that's their choice. That's where feminism is about. It's about women making their own choices and finding opportunity. And if they want to do that, they should be able to do that. Why is this situation significant for the environment? Lower human population means less stress on the ecosystem. Ecofeminists take inspiration from people like Henry David Thoreau, Aldo Leopold, John Muir, and Rachel Carson. It surprised me that feminists were drawing deeply from the writings of male environmentalists. Even co-feminists globally have influenced the Greenbelt movement in Kenya and the revelation of the Love Canal in the 1970s. Another perspective that might help the environmentalist cause is learning about philosophies and religious perspectives that enhance human relationships with the natural world. Throughout the history of Western civilization, there has been disconnect between the natural world as having intrinsic worth to itself and the concept of human society's needs. After all, nature was often portrayed as hostile to humanity because survival against natural forces was not assured until recently, at least in Western society. Nature was often cast as a difficulty to overcome or threatening as the whale in Melville's Moby Dick was. However, the culture of Europe and European colonizers is not the only culture on Earth. There are other cultures on Earth, other ways of relating to the natural world that enhance human relationships with nature. This is something that needs to be understood by us with care. We also need to be respectful in that learning and acknowledge that we cannot necessarily be totally like other people. But we can draw from their knowledge, from their wisdom, Those of us who are born of colonizers should be cautious not to claim the religions and philosophies of those people who were conquered. Doing so is often considered disrespectful and an attempt to take one more thing from indigenous peoples. For example, I cannot say that I'm a Taoist, yet I can admire ideas that are drawn out of observation of the natural world, as the Taoists do, and integrate them within my own Western perspective. This is a path of learning and wisdom that respects the uniqueness of a culture. Another ethical path is about how we make ethical decisions concerning new technology. There is a need for humanity to create a system, a systemic analysis of technological advancements. Decisions about new technology have to consider the environmental impact. Will these advancements damage the environment? Will they exhaust resources like energy and water? Will they cause disease or damaging noise? Might they become dangerous to the natural environment and to people? These questions are the ones that people who live near proposed artificial intelligence centers, even in the Lehigh Valley, are asking. These are good questions, and they should be part of an ethical framework that includes environmental impact. Though we might consider this in the reflection on current events, these questions are of a broader concern ethically. We need to create an ethical way to analyze technology for its impact on the natural world, and then a decision should be made about whether the technology should be permitted to be created. We need to regulate ourselves better. Last week I spoke of reverence as an attitude of respect and awe. We need to foster in our society a reverence for the natural world, a sense that there is something in nature that is and is not like us. We need to bring forth in our society an awareness that nature has a right to exist, and that our use of natural resources needs to come with responsibility, not to harm fragile ecosystems. Yesterday, I saw something like this happening. I viewed a video of something that amazed me. In Sumatra, the government built a road but through a forest that divided the population of orangutans. Crossing the road would likely kill many of that endangered species. The Sumatran government, along with international nature organizations, built rope bridges from trees that hung over the road so that the orangutans would be able to cross the road without risking their lives. This week, the first orangutan took a walk over the rope bridge over that highway. It is likely that other orangutans will learn from that example and safely cross the road from trees to trees. Reverence from the natural world means that we respect other forms of life and create the means for nature to prosper and to coexist with us. Reverence also means that we experience the balance of the natural world. I remember that our distant ancestors were part of the natural balance in ways to which we could never return. In reverence, we are in awe of that very real connection that existed when we also lived more openly like the animals. Birute Galdkas, and you'll pardon me, that's a difficult name to pronounce, was a primatologist and friend of Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall. Her area of study was the orangutans of Borneo. She was an acquaintance of our own Karen Berry, spent about 10 days with her. I rarely envy a congregant too much, but I do envy her that. Galdicas died a month ago. In her respect for the natural world, Birute Galdicas wrote about the idea of Eden. She meant Eden not as a literal place, as mentioned in the Bible, but as a condition of living as an animal in an ecosystem, being aligned with the natural world as we once were before we attained sentience and saw ourselves as different from nature. In these closing words, she tells us of seeing the world spiritually, as our distant ancestors did. She writes, this is the closing of her book, about the orangutans and her work with them in Borneo. Our departure from Eden allows us reflection on our origins and relations to other creatures, reflection on good and evil, and ultimately, reflection on the possibility that we are engineering our own extinction. Never having left Eden, our innocent Pongid is the classification for orangutans. Our innocent Pongid kin are not burdened by this knowledge and the responsibility it entails. Looking into the calm, unblinking eyes of an orangutan, we see, as though through a series of mirrors, not only the image of our own creation, but also a reflection of our own souls. And an Eden that was once ours, and on occasion, fleetingly, just for a nanosecond, but with an intensity that is shocking in its profoundness, we recognize that there is no separation between ourselves and nature. We are allowed to see the eyes